Referees didn't just influence the Cowboys-Chiefs game on Thanksgiving. They ignited a firestorm that will follow this result for days. Dallas left AT&T Stadium with a 31-28 win, but the aftertaste is all controversy. Kansas City was flagged 10 times for 119 yards. Several of the penalties came at pivotal moments, and a couple of those calls swung late possessions in Dallas's favor. Arrowhead pride is only Martinez. You can point to the scoreboard and say the Cowboys won, and they did, but when you watch the tape, a few of those flags feel like the kind of borderline judgment call fouls that create more headlines than clarity. ESPN's Jeremy Fowler called some of the pass interference flags ticky-tack, and a handful of viewers thought the league handed the Cowboys extra wind late in the game. 2 pass interference flags on Kansas City's defense helped sustain Dallas's game-sealing drive, and social feeds exploded the moment those flags fell. SI. The most obvious example came on the final drive. Trent McDuffie was flagged for defensive pass interference on a contested catch by CeeDee Lamb, a spot and stare call that handed Dallas a fresh set of downs in a pressure cooker moment. Plenty of fans argued Lamb shoved off on the route. Others said McDuffie got his hands on the receiver. Either way, the flag turned a late third down into a chain mover and changed the chessboard when the game hung in the balance. ASUSA. And then there were the non-calls that rankled Cowboys fans who expected parity. George Pickens took his helmet off while lying on the turf after a first down catch in the first quarter, a technical 15-yard infraction that was waved away. Pickens' helmet did come off after contact, and replays suggested it was more an accidental issue than a deliberate taunt. But the inconsistency, one play reviewed, another not, is exactly what fuels the conspiracy threads on X. SI, of course, officiating controversies are only part of the story. The Chiefs left plenty of points and momentum on the field. A fourth-quarter drop by Rashee Rice, a couple of near takeaways in the red zone that didn't materialize, and missed opportunities that would have bluntly changed the math on those late flags. Kansas City's penalty total was obscene, but you can't ignore the self-inflicted wounds that handed Dallas extra life even before the refs took center stage. Arrowhead pride. Andy Reid handled the post-game questions with practiced diplomacy, calling the calls but agreeing to move forward. "I'm not always going to agree with the call, but the calls were made," he said. That line is coach speak and truth. Pointing at the officials won't score points for your team. Yet when a high-leverage flag flips a possession in the fourth quarter, coaches will notice, and so will a fan base already primed for outrage. Arrowhead pride. Here's the practical takeaway for both teams. For Dallas, the win is huge. Prescott closed well, the offense made big plays when it had to, and the Cowboys now have momentum heading into a tough stretch. For Kansas City, it's a 2-part problem: discipline and optics. 10 penalties is a stat that reads like a coaching memo. Clean it up. But the optics of a few high-visibility flags will stick unless the Chiefs start forcing the conversation back to execution instead of officiating. Arrowhead pride. And for the league, this game is another reminder that rulebook interpretation still lives in gray zones. When broadcast angles and slow-motion replays show a play differently than the on-field crew saw it, fans cry inconsistency. The league can blunt that by speeding up replay assist, getting clearer mic'd explanations post-game, or publicly addressing controversial calls sooner. Until then, every holiday game will double as a referee audit for the internet. PFSN. But don't mistake heat for the whole truth. The Chiefs had chances to blunt the narrative. Cleaner tackling at critical moments, 2 red zone stops turned into turnovers rather than near turnovers, and fewer mental errors. Penalties matter, especially late in tight rivalry games, but so does execution. Kansas City can spend the week pointing at flags, or it can spend the week fixing the mistakes that put them in those high-leverage spots in the first place. Arrowhead pride. If you're a fan, here's what to watch in the aftermath. How the league's officiating office addresses or doesn't address the most controversial calls, whether the Cowboys were genuinely helped enough to change the outcome, and whether the Chiefs' coaching staff tweaks its discipline and situational preparation. This game will linger as both a Dallas momentum boost and a Kansas City what if that will be rehashed until the holidays fade. ASUSA final thought: Officiating controversies make for furious Twitter storms and late-night monologues, but they rarely exist in a vacuum. This one was messy because of a perfect storm: borderline PI flags, a non-call on a helmet removal, and a team that compounded the optics with mistakes. The result is a headline that reads, "Cowboys win," a subtitle that reads, "Chiefs get reamed by penalties," and an epilogue that says, "Next week, the tape will tell us whether this was a fluke, a pattern, or just another Thanksgiving that left everybody arguing about flags." Arrowhead pride. You could feel the game tilting long before the final whistle, not because one team suddenly outplayed the other, but because the balance kept getting nudged by yellow flags. What should have been a clean, dramatic Thanksgiving duel instead turned into a debate about where the game actually ended: on the field or at the refs' fingertips. Dallas came away with a 31-28 win, but what people are still arguing about is how many of those yards were decided by penalties, and whether a couple of calls on the Cowboys' final drive changed the outcome. Reuters. There's no denying the football moments that made this a great game. Dak Prescott carved up the Chiefs with big-time throws when Dallas needed them. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens made explosive plays, and Patrick Mahomes answered with his usual late-game wizardry. But the stat line that won't sit well in Kansas City is the penalty total. The Chiefs were flagged 10 times for 119 yards, a number that repeatedly erased momentum and extended Cowboys drives at the worst times for Kansas City. Andy Reid and his staff were blunt about it afterward. Penalties were a killer in what was otherwise a winnable night. Reuters. What escalated the debate were a pair of pass interference flags late in the game, especially one on Trent McDuffie in tight coverage of CeeDee Lamb that wiped away a potential stop and gave Dallas a fresh set of downs. That call and another similar spot earlier on the drive felt small and subjective enough that fans and analysts immediately labeled them ticky-tack, and social feeds lit up accusing the officiating crew of being inconsistent. When multiple high-leverage penalties fall on one side in a single drive, it's inevitable the conversation turns to fairness and standards. SI. The reaction wasn't just heat from unhappy fans. Analysts pointed to the calls as game turners, and social media churned with clips and hot takes within minutes. Some commentators argued the defensive calls were borderline at best. Others noted missed enforcement on the Cowboys sideline after a play where George Pickens briefly removed his helmet on the turf, technically a 15-yard penalty that went unflagged. Those kinds of split-second enforcement decisions are the friction points that make officiating controversies feel less like isolated mistakes and more like systemic inconsistency. PFSN still. It's important to remember that officiating doesn't play the game alone. Kansas City had opportunities to shorten the list of complaints: a few costly drops, near takeaways that didn't materialize, and sequences where their offense stalled at the wrong time. Mahomes threw 4 touchdowns and Rashee Rice made plays, but the Chiefs also gave away yardage and momentum through penalties that compounded mistakes on the field. Coach Reid acknowledged that. You can see both sides of the scoreboard debate. Bad calls hurt, but missed chances hurt just as much. Yahoo Thethau. What this loss does to Kansas City is immediate and practical. It drops them back to .500 and turns the rest of the schedule into a must-win gauntlet if they want to keep playoff hopes alive. For the Cowboys, the win is a momentum shove, one that'll be whispered about for the officiating, but real in the standings. In the long view, games like this often become touchstones for both teams: a what-if for Kansas City and a what next for Dallas. Coaches will review film, officials will presumably review mechanics, and social media will move on until the next headline rips open the same arguments. Reuters. If you want the image that'll stick, a late Dallas first down that came with a whistle, a replay, and 1,000 takes, and the same stadium that had cheered two teams now arguing whether the call made was part of the game or a replacement for it. Football is noisy. Sometimes the noise is the point. Tonight, the noise will outlive the box score. NFL.com.